Something about the way those words landed felt quietly powerful. Not dramatic. Not scandalous. Just honest. When Ben Shephard spoke about him and his wife Annie leading quite separate lives, it wasn't the kind of confession that usually sends social media into meltdown. It was something softer, more recognizable, and somehow more moving for it. For years, viewers watched Ben on Good Morning Britain with that familiar, steady presence. Always warm, always professional, rarely offering much of his private world. Then, in a candid interview, he opened up about the reality of a marriage that has lasted more than 2 decades. Annie, he explained, is more solitary than he is. Happier in her own company. The kind of person who will gently, or not so gently, ask for space. "Can you leave me alone for 5 seconds, please?" he recalled her saying. And rather than sounding frustrated, Ben seemed almost affectionate about it. That detail alone stopped many people in their tracks. Because it didn't sound like a complaint. It sounded like respect. He went on to describe their everyday patterns. His off working. She has her work in garden and interior design. When he has free time, he wants something physical, a run, golf, the gym, sport. She prefers art galleries and gardens. Different rhythms. Different ways of recharging. And yet, after more than 20 years together and 2 sons who are now stepping into their own lives, Ben still called Annie the most important factor in their family. The person who created the home that shaped their boys. The influence who made him better at being a dad. There's something quietly radical in that honesty. In a culture that often romanticizes constant togetherness, Ben was describing a marriage that makes room for difference. Space doesn't have to mean distance. Separate lives, in this telling, seem to mean separate energies that still orbit the same center. Many viewers who followed him through his years on Good Morning Britain and now on This Morning seem to feel the weight of the empty nest chapter unfolding beneath those words. The house growing quieter. The boys moving on, one at university, the other preparing to travel. The familiar noise of family life softening. And in that quieter space, 2 people who have always been different learning, perhaps for the first time in years, how to simply be with each other again. Ben spoke about the excitement of that challenge. Finding things that work for both of them. Not forcing the same hobbies. Not pretending their needs are identical. Just looking for the overlap, and treating that search as something hopeful rather than difficult. You can almost feel the studio atmosphere of the shows he's known for when you read those comments. The same man who could steer a live breakfast conversation with ease was, in that interview, allowing a more private truth to surface. Not for drama. Not for headlines. Just because it was true. And that truth seemed to resonate with people who know what it is to love someone whose way of being in the world is different from your own. Some audiences online interpreted the exchange as refreshingly mature. Others felt a flicker of recognition. The partner who needs solitude, the one who thrives on activity, the couple who have built a life that doesn't require them to match energy every hour of the day. There was admiration in a lot of the reactions. Not the breathless kind, but the quieter sort that comes when someone public simply tells the truth about ordinary, lasting love. What lingered for many wasn't the phrase "separate lives" itself, but the tone around it. There was no bitterness. No suggestion of drifting apart. Instead there was gratitude, patience, and a clear sense that Annie's need for space was something Ben understood and protected. In return, she has given him the freedom to do the work he does. That mutual allowance feels rare and valuable. As their sons move further into adulthood, the next chapter is already beginning. The house will be quieter. The days will look different. And Ben, characteristically upbeat, called that prospect exciting. Not because everything will suddenly become identical, but because they get to discover what shared ground still waits for them. Perhaps that's why the moment stayed with people. It wasn't a revelation of crisis. It was a quiet portrait of a long marriage that has room for two distinct people. A reminder that closeness doesn't always look like constant company. Sometimes it looks like knowing when to give the other person 5 seconds, or 5 hours, and still choosing each other every day. In the end, maybe what stayed with viewers wasn't just what Ben said, but everything that seemed to exist between the words. The respect. The history. The willingness to keep learning each other after more than 20 years. And perhaps that's why moments like this continue to spark conversation long after the cameras stop rolling. What did you notice in those comments? Did any of it feel familiar?